Hey guys, it's Aaron. I got a question on one of my recent videos about what kind of equipment I use and if I had any recommendations for cheap kit to start out with, and so that's what we're talking about today. First off, I want to say that I think it's quite important to invest in things that you really care about, and personally I love photography and videography, and I love making videos, so that was kind of two birds with one stone. But if you don't have the money to invest lots and lots into equipment, then that's not necessarily a problem. You can make little steps over time by investing in smaller things. If you're curious how I did something in a video, you can always leave a comment asking me how I did it and I'll most likely respond. But if you're curious to see an updated list of my equipment, I'll make sure to always include that in the description below as well. Obviously, I'm currently filming, so it's going to be very difficult for me to show you my equipment, but I'll make sure to have the things pop up on screen while I talk about them. So the first thing that a lot of people think is that you have to have a DSLR. Lots of big YouTubers use DSLRs to film, and so that's kind of the standard for vloggers now. However, you can use lots of different things to film on. A lot of people film their lives, and so a DSLR is quite chunky and hard to carry with you, so they use point and shoot cameras, which are a really nice way to start off. I knew I wanted to invest, so I bought a DSLR right away, but I also have a compact camera that is just easier to carry around with me. I currently still have the Canon PowerShot S120, but I'm not sure if that's being sold anymore. A good equivalent for that though would be the Canon G7X Mark II or the Sony Alpha 6000, I think that's what it's called. Maybe it's the 6500, I'm not entirely sure. You can compare them and see what kind of price range suits you more. However, if you don't have the money to spend on a compact camera or on a DSLR, then you can always use your smartphone. A lot of smartphones currently have really good cameras in them. Just make sure that you don't use the front-facing camera while you're filming, but you use the normal camera on the back. If you do want to invest a little bit of money, I think getting a DSLR is a good move because you can always upgrade the quality of your videos by getting different lenses rather than having to buy a whole new camera. I'm currently shooting on the Canon 70D, but I used to shoot on the 60D. There's also cheaper versions of those. If you add a zero to it, they are made of plastic, they're a little bit lighter, and I think they can film for a little bit less long, but in their own right, they are good cameras to start out with. There is also other brands that you can pick. I usually pick Canon because that is what I've always used, and if I were to switch now, obviously all my lenses wouldn't necessarily work anymore. I like Canon for the facial recognition features and just the easy to use interface, but if you want to go the extra mile, Sony do 4K cameras, and I'm not too sure about Panasonic or Nikon, but all of them have their own pros and cons, so it's kind of up to you to do your own research on that. One thing I think is slightly more important than your camera is your sound. A lot of people like using microphones that clip onto the camera and that you can plug into your camera and it'll record the sound straight onto there. However, I think that it's better to record your sound separately because the preamp in a DSLR isn't necessarily the best because a DSLR is mostly for taking pictures and sometimes video, but you always end up with a bit of a hissing or a humming sound if you do record audio straight into your camera. You can fix this by doing some audio editing, but it is a lot of effort, and I personally think that syncing up the audio is a lot easier to do. Now, because I'm a singer, I already have a decent microphone that I use to record with, so I also use that to record the audio for my videos. I use the Rode NT1, which I plug into a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 audio interface that then can plug into my computer and I record the audio on Logic. Now, I know that's a bit on the pricey side, but a good equivalent for that would be to get a memo recorder. So the Zoom H1 or the Zoom H2N or the Zoom H4N, I think, are all very good options to go with. Some are pricier than others, which means they will also most likely give you more freedom with your sound and give you a little bit better quality. They range, I think, from around £80 to £400, which I know again is still a lot of money, but it's less money than investing in a whole microphone setup. Then for lighting, I got some cheap lights of Amazon. I think these were around £40. I will leave a link in the description so you can find the same ones. I have two of them. One is there behind me, which is lighting up my background for me, and I have one right here that will light up my face. A lot of people prefer using 3-point lighting, which would mean that there would be a light coming from here onto my head, giving me a nice rim. I don't have the lights for that, and doing it this way works pretty well for me. So if you want some basic lighting, this is a good option to go for. They are quite bulky though, so you can put them up when you're filming and take them down afterwards, but I always leave them up just because I have the space and because I kind of got used to having them here anyway. For my tripod, I use the Velbon EX530. There is a cheaper version of that as well that is a little bit more lightweight, but it is also less stable, so I decided to go with this one. But there's lots of tripods online that you can use. I'll leave a link in the description so you can find my one and see if that's an okay price for you. I think it was £35. I don't remember that specifically though, so it might be a bit more expensive. One thing I really love about filming with this camera is that I no longer need to use batteries. I bought an adapter that I can just plug into the wall, and I would highly suggest doing that if you have a DSLR. It just makes it a lot easier. You don't have to have one battery on charge and one in your camera and one ready for going in your camera if this one dies. And that's what I used to do, so I do have 3 batteries and they're great for when I go shooting outside or on location, but it's so much effort to keep track of which battery is full and which one's dead, and so plugging it into the wall makes my life so much easier. I'll leave a link to the one that I bought in the description as well, and hopefully that'll help you out. The lens I'm currently using is the Sigma 1.8 18 to 35mm. I used to use a 50mm lens from Canon, and before that I used the standard kit lens that came with my camera. But I decided to change that up because I wanted something that looked a lot nicer. A shallow field of depth or a low f-stop will help you get a more crisp image, and it will help you blur out the background more, which is something that I really like the look of, so that's what I prefer using when I'm filming. The 50mm lens I used to use also had a very shallow depth of field. I think the f-stop was 1.4, meaning that the background was a little more blurry, but I can deal with that compromise. The one issue I had with that lens is that you have to be very far away from your camera, and so you can't touch it to adjust focus or start recording easily, and you always moved through the frame really quickly, which I found very tricky to use. I added on my laptop, which is a MacBook Pro. I needed one for uni anyway, so I had to get a laptop, so I figured I would kind of splurge and buy quite a good one. If you have a MacBook Air, I think that isn't necessarily as good because MacBook Airs have a lot less CPU, meaning that it's very slow to use when you do high intensity things, and video editing does take up a lot of your CPU. So I edit on my MacBook Pro and I use Adobe Premiere Pro, which I think is a very professional, very easy to use editing software. A lot of people prefer using Final Cut Pro 10 or iMovie even, but personally I love Adobe software and I love using Photoshop, and I'm already familiar with how it works, and so I decided to use that instead. Now I know Adobe Premiere Pro is quite expensive, so I'll leave a few suggestions of cheap or free editing softwares in the description below. Obviously iMovie comes with every Mac and Windows Movie Maker comes with a Windows PC, but I don't know how Windows Movie Maker works nowadays, but it used to be really bad when I used to use it, so I don't know. I record my audio into Logic, which is a paid program for the Mac. A free equivalent for that would be GarageBand, or for Windows people you can also use Audacity. It's a lot less versatile, you can do a lot less with it, but basically it does record your audio for you. However, if you are using a memo recorder like the Zoom H1 or the Zoom H2n, you won't need software like this because you can record onto the device and then put the SD card into your computer right away. So I think that's kind of it for the gear that I use and the things I would recommend using when you're only starting out. Make sure to check the description. I will leave loads and loads of more information there on cheap and free alternatives for the things I'm using. If you have any other questions, make sure to leave a comment down below and I'll happily try it and help you figure things out. I made a video a while ago about some tips for smaller creators as well. You can check that out here. And don't forget to subscribe here and leave this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And I will see you very, very soon. Goodbye!